All right. How you doing, Dave?
I am well. It is a sunny, windy, beautiful morning here in Arizona. So just getting up and around, and kind of a light day today. I've been working so hard on all these things this year. It's been actually a great year, productive year. But now I feel like I kind of at the end of the line and able to just sort of unplug and kick back and
Oh,
head
that's
into the
all.
holidays. Yeah, so it's good. I like it. It feels good actually.
And you do so many things. And the thing is, you follow through on your things. There's so many people that do a lot of things, but then the half-baked idea never gets baked. But even starting with the morning, let's talk about Ellefson coffee. I mean, let's start with that.
There we go. It's always close by.
Oh man, how did that come about? That's a good jump off point.
We had a production assistant on the Megadeth tour. This was back in the earlier part of the decade, probably 2000, I don't know, 14 or 15, and she knew Paul Wagoner, who's the guitar player in Between the Buried and Me, and she said, "Man, you got to meet Paul, and you guys would click over coffee," and so she, hooked us up, and it's funny, Paul and I, we did, he's like kind of a straight edge, tattooed, vegan,
Okay.
thrash metal guy, right? And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
a modern generation of that, and yeah, total coffee nerd like me, and so we just hit it off, and so we started Ellefson Coffee Company with our first roast, which was Roast in Peace, and it was a single origin Brazilian bean that he had. That's originally where it started. And I'm not gonna lie, I thought originally it's like, look, Paul, you handle it, put my name on it, send me royalties. That's kind of how easy I wanted it to be. And it started there. We started online, ellefsoncoffeeco.com, which is still there. And actually that's our main portal to order coffee.
Okay, I'm going to put the link in the chat. So the link.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's funny because in 2020, in the world of Amazon, we've had an amazing year because people need their coffee delivered right to their door. So it's actually worked out pretty good. But that's where it started. We quickly grew, and then we started going around. Danny Wimmer was kind enough to let us bring our coffee into his Wimmer Fests, Carolina Rebellion and Rockin' the Range, and all these Chicago Open Air, I guess, is where we started it when Megadeth played there, and was really great. And Danny's very supportive of artist activations, they call it, so like the Trooper beer and Maynard's wine and Ellefson coffee, and he loves that the artists, he gives us a platform to do that, which is
right
really gracious of him. So that really, next thing we're buying a motorhome and tents and stuff, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute, this is way beyond just put my name on it and send me a check, so, but that's my life, it's my life anyway, but it's my life certainly in music. I realized, it's always been entrepreneurial ever since I was a kid. When I first got into this thing at like age 11 and picked the bass up, that's what it is. You buy the PA, you buy the lights, get a van, a trailer, you get some crew, you go out, you play gigs, and that's what it is. And you sort of build a business around your passions. So that's ultimately what my life is, with coffee, with music, with books, with CDs, and all of it. Record label, book company, film company. You sort of you create the runway to get the thing up into the air, and like you say,
that makes a lot of sense. I have a friend, Mike McShane, and he's pretty high up in Sony PlayStation, and we were in a band for years. And he says, you won't believe how much because the band is just Banshees, trying to apply Logic to the Banshees. He's like, when you take that to a Sony boardroom, it's like a cakewalk, doing a presentation, selling it to, a presentation's way easier than selling a song in the band room, but it's the same template. He's like, I apply a lot of the same psychology because there's so much psychology in a band and Logic. That's really,
I think maybe that'll be my next, philosophical book, is everything I learned in life, I learned in a rock band, It's kind of like those books, everything I needed to know in life, I learned in kindergarten, like look both ways, please, thank you, hold hands crossing the street, like just general life stuff. That's kind of my life. Everything I've learned growing up, in rock bands, how to get along. Look, let's face it, bands are the same 4, 5, or 6 personalities in every band you go to. That's why like, I hate this band, I'm going to go to join a new one. And look, the corporate culture may be different, and obviously things can be, different, but ultimately drummers are drummers, singers are singers, bass players are bass players. There's kind of a generalship, not entirely, but there's sort of a generalship, of our personalities. And I remember Frank Zappa talked about that. He said, the French horn player is a certain kind of person, the clarinet player is a certain person, and I subscribe to that. That it's like we are sort of, the die is cast with our personality, and it's almost like our instruments choose us. We don't really choose our instruments.
I totally agree. I did a podcast a few weeks ago, and the girl asked me to not be so psychological. And I was like, I look at a band as 100% just psychological in this. And at the same time, it's so smart. It's almost like a gang mentality, which is a stupid mentality. You have that gang where they're killing each other, and you get this corner. It's being in them for years. It's such a strange thing. And you have to do it to truly to go deep and have the relationships you've had for so many decades, and to go away, come back. I mean, I've known the guy. I'm in one band with the guy that I've known since '84, and we've cried, hated, done everything, and it's amazing to take that journey.
Well, it is that. I mean, and it is a gang. I mean, that's why I joined bands. It's like, there's a critical moment, like in 5th grade when I picked up the tenor sax, and by this point I'd already been taking some piano lessons and stuff. So I was already a musician. And it's like, all right, are you going to be a jock? You're going to be a bookworm, or you want to play in the band? All right, well, I guess I'll take up an instrument because I don't want to be a jock. And I wasn't like I really wanted to play in the band. I just didn't want to do the other things, right?
Totally makes sense, yeah.
So what's the lesser of the evils? All right, I'll take up the saxophone. Never did really like it. Got reasonably good at it, but never really called to my soul. And then, I started hearing rock and roll on the radio. My mom had records around the house, Beatles and Elvis records and things. And suddenly the bass guitar came across my radar, mostly because of that Kiss Destroyer record back there, and the Not Fragile record. And that made me want to be a rock star, So as much as I'm a bass player and you have to be a musician ultimately to play it, I was already a musician, but the bass made me want to be a rock star. And that was the turning point, because there's a big difference. And I joined Berklee College, and I joined some of these forums. And, we get to kind of geek out as musicians, because that's part of what we do. And if you're going to have a career, you have to step up your musical knowledge and communication with
100%.
To some degree, learn the language of music. You can't just live in Spain and not speak Spanish. You know what I mean? At some point, if you're going to live amongst musicians, you got to be able to speak the language.
What's funny on that point, I just had Dave from Tesla on, and we were talking about, I grew up on the East Coast, and lessons were a big thing. Study Steve Harris, even study maybe a little Jocko. And when I moved to Los Angeles, I played bass as well. People were almost anti-playing some of this Johnny Thunders, rock and roll crowd. It was just so, I couldn't believe how many people couldn't play. They just
I had the same experience. When I moved to LA in 1983, at this point, so I was 18, so I guess I'd been playing probably 7 years or so by that point. But had been, again, I started taking piano lessons, I don't know, by age 8 or 9, learning how to read music, read manuscripts. I was able to kind of self-teach myself bass, because I could buy, the Mel Bay bass books and read. I could read manuscript, and I knew music.
Mel Bay, that's the best.
Yeah, Mel Bay. Right? So I always tell people, because sometimes you go, well, what's some advice you give me? I said, well, first of all, take some lessons. Learn not only how to play the bass, learn how to play music.
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately what you're doing, jamming, when you're in a room even. Learn music, know what the notes on the neck are.
100%, yeah.
When the guitar player is playing this note, that you can play this chord underneath of it, and how that relates to the drummer and maybe a keyboard player if you got horns in your band. So the more diverse you can be, and also then once you start going out and playing with people, when you start playing with people, now you're part of a conversation.
Right.
It's like you sit at home. There's no conversation. It's a solo endeavor. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So when you get in a room with people, whether you're playing at church or you're playing at a stadium or you're just jamming in your living room, whatever the situation, you're having a conversation with your musicians, and now you've got an audience who's basically listening to the conversation. They're observing it, and that's really what a concert is people, just churn and digging on the dialogue that we're doing on the stage.
Do you ever we're literally pushing air through magnets? That sometimes it freaks me out that this whole thing is with magnets and pushing air. It's such a spiritual awakening at what it does to people. Sometimes it overwhelms me when I think of that.
Well, and in the late 90s, I remember, Megadeth, we were working really hard, touring big tours, and burned out. At times you're just exhausted, and I remember flying, looking down somewhere as I'm coming into a city, and just going, it's a lot of work to like move all these people, bunch of big black speaker boxes and stuff all around the world to just do this same thing night after night, city after city. Is there a way we can get all them to come to us? and it's funny, here we are in the pandemic.
Exactly.
This is it. This is and I think now here we are, doing these drive-ins or live Zoom concerts or whatever we're doing. And we realize, as we I think always know, the internet is just a sort of portal into another dimension, if you will. It's never quite the same because you and I one-on-one is an easier conversation versus into a large concert. The more people oftentimes creates just a larger synergy, and there's little sub conversations within the bigger conversation.
Right.
So
right.
It's this has been an interesting year to try some of these things, and it's funny that the good Lord would bless us with technology over all these years so that when this pandemic did hit, we're not just sidelined. I mean, imagine 20, 30 years ago without any internet, and cell phones and stuff, we'd be sitting at home writing letters to each other. And then
I know.
And warned not to go to the mailbox because it might be infected.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. There's so much. It is. And I appreciate it probably the same way you appreciate it, because you and I as kids, what was the biggest goal was to get something wrapped in plastic in a store. I mean, that was the grail to get. And now that's the only thing that really makes me go, oh my God, anybody starting, the internet will let you go into the store tomorrow. And we fought our whole lives just to get something, an album wrapped in plastic in the store so someone in the mall in Iowa could hear it. And that's totally accessible now.
Well, it's, not to be a shameless plug, but just because I have one sitting right here. I'm doing a lot of interviews, but so it's funny, I've been asked a lot about like this new Ellefson no cover record, which we did a double CD, 4-side vinyl. And, it's, and I got to give the credit to my partner, Tom Hazar, because he's such a fan, he's really just a fan, and he's a collector. And so he kind of always re-educates me, because I've been, in the business, as a professional for, over 40 years and making a living doing this. So it's like, it's good to always sort of be brought back to center, and reminded. And we do this with Megadeth, of course, too. We go to great lengths to do the artwork, the credits, the lyrics, who played what solo. I mean, we really get detailed because we grew up in that environment where, again, you buy something wrapped in plastic, you rip it open, you open it, the smell of the ink and the printing is toxic because it is. It's like part of the experience. And then you put the CD on and you sit and you read the lyrics or the credits. And I go back and I look at even records that I played on, early Megadeth records, and I'll see someone's name. I go, oh my God, I totally forgot about that guy. Or, this girl was in the mix, or that engineer. And you know what I mean? It's even for me, it's a trip down memory lane,
Yeah. My life changed by reading. When I was in the East Coast, I set out my LA plan by reading liner notes and going, oh, the name Kim Fowley's on a Crew record, a Poison record. And I kind of got my plan. But dude, I want to go to that record because I don't know whether it was you or Tom, but that your new record, No Cover, floored me on so many levels, and it symbolizes so much to me. I don't know if you remember this movie. Do you remember Over the Edge with Matt Dillon? That to me, the music at that point, that said so much to me. And your record is such a capsule of this time that I grew up with this guy, Steve, in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And do you remember Deicide? Do you know Deicide?
Oh, yeah.
He ended up forming Deicide. He was my boy. But these were the bands we listened to before our divide, when I started liking Rat and Crew, and still liking but there's something about, and then I realized Tom was doing this with you. And Fastway Say What You Will against the Priest song against Beth. It's like, and the On Through the Night cover. It's perfect. This is a perfect record. Explain to me, dude. I mean, I'm floored. I'm gonna actually. This will play after, but the previous Wednesday, I'm doing a whole show and I'm gonna play all the record because I want this. I usually do concerts, but this record says so much of this era of growing up. It's really special, man.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for that. And yeah, look, it's me and Tom, and we have a really good compatibility in our partnership and collaboration. Some collaborations are like one guy writes a song and then it gets competitive. Oh yeah, well, I'm going to write one too, or I need to write one better than that, and it gets competitive, and I never find long term that that's such a healthy thing, even though it can push each other. Tom and I are more like, we got on the phone in early June, and because we originally were going to put out at the Ellefson, we have an Ellefson solo record of mostly original material, and it's mostly done now. But we were going to put it out in October on Halloween, and we just said, listen, there's no way that we can't tour, we can't support a record, so it would be foolish. It'll just fall through the cracks. So we said, what, let's knock out some covers with not really a plan. Maybe some digital, maybe we'll put it up on whatever, iTunes, Spotify. And then, within a conversation, we had 4 or 5 songs. Next day, we had 7 or 8 songs. By the end of the week, we had 15 tracks picked out. The way we work is Tom and I will brainstorm the idea. I send the songs over to Andy Martingelli over in Italy. So he's 9 hours ahead over there. So the time zone really works in our favor because we get to have this 24-hour sort of music factory.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's cool. Yeah.
Right. It's awesome. So like I sent, and Wasted, which is why we have the homage of the Def Leppard Up Through the Night. So Wasted was the first song. I said, dude, we got to do
Wow.
Wasted.
That floored me. Just as a kid, I sat and heard that before High and Dry, and you're like, people don't know the magnitude of that song.
I know, right? And that's why Frank Hannon, from Tesla, he's like, oh my God, I love that. And of course, he knows the Def Leppard guys. Tesla tours a lot with them, and so as we just, as I just started like naming them, Andy and Tom brought Rebel Yell in, our U.S. touring band. We have a couple members from Dead by Wednesday who are on Combat Records, our label we own. And they brought in Eat the Rich. That was a song they wanted to do. So it was very collaborative. I was like, hey, if you got a great idea, bring it in. My only thing is I want it to be the Ellefson band. I wanted to, we're not going to down tune and get all metalized with these songs. It's going to be heavy. It's going to have a nice weight and impact to it. But these are great rock songs from the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s. So I want the song to come out. Then, and the guests weren't even part of this really initially. As we got into it, we actually, Charlie Benanti, I think, was one of the first ones. Tom was chatting with him, and this is June, of course, things were locked down still, and so Tom invited him. He said, look, why don't you throw some drum tracks down? So he was agreeable to do it, and then Jason McMaster, and then I hit Jimmy DeGrasso, and Jimmy brought in Andrew Freeman, and then I hit Todd Kearns from Slash's band, and this is just how it went, right? And it was just kind of.
And you've also got Bumblefoot, everybody.
Yeah. Well, that's a funny thing. So so we come up with the idea. I sent it to Andy. I say, dude, bang these 4 songs out, put them into like a Pro Tool session, send them back over. Literally the next morning, he has it done. He's so he drinks a lot of coffee. That's why we're good friends, I guess. And so coffee? Well, no, he's got his own Italian coffee over there, whatever they drink. I've been to his house. He's got an amazing espresso maker. And then, by the time I wake up, I've got 3 songs sitting here. So I plug in, start cutting bass, get it up to Tom. He goes over to Madison, starts cutting vocals. We send it over to Bumblefoot. Bumblefoot is really our secret vocal weapon.
Wow.
He's such a good singer. He sings in the band Asia now. If that's any.
I love Asia. Oh my God.
Enough said, right?
Talk about album artwork as well, not only just the music.
Yeah. You're singing John Wetton songs and you're collaborating on that level. That's Bumble, not to mention his guitar playing is incredible. Yeah. So that's just how it layers, and it just kind of comes together like that. So that's the Ellefson band sound. And it's in our drummer Paulo is over in Italy with Andy. And just because it's funny, the drummer guests, we've got these amazing vocal and drummer guests between, again, Benante, Lombardo, Dave McClain, who now plays in Sacred Reich, is just incredible. So I mean, he kicks it right out of the gate with Free Will Burning and tear it loose, and you're just like, even me just listening to it now, I'm just like, God dang, man, McClain is just a monster. I mean, just incredible. So got Dirk Verburen on here, obviously Megadeth drummer now, Chuck Beeler, former Megadeth drummer,
Doro
play on Love Me Like a Reptile. So it's like I feel like we've corralled the mighty metal drummers, and we've got with Brandon from Crowbots and Jason McMaster and Doro, Bumblefoot. I just feel like we're blessed with an amazing cachet of vocalists too.
Oh, it's so good. And the one that say what you will. I mean, everybody. I feel like Fastway got very ignored between because you have UFO, you have Flogging Molly, all these things that nobody goes. That record blew my mind on early MTV when that came out. Oh my God!
And it's funny, so again, starting with Wasted, Rebel Yell, the idea to hit me about doing Not Fragile by BTO, which I realize probably not a lot of people know from, I'm 56 years old. Tom's 10 years younger than me. So, then I'll Beat Her Aim by Cheap Trick. There's some of these songs that just become, Cheap Trick is a band for everybody, guys, girls, young, old, whatever. Like everyone there's a Cheap Trick song that speaks to everybody. And I say Cheap Trick's kind of like Van Halen, same thing.
I agree totally.
Right?
It's and the joy, just the joy. Like you go, man, this band God put on this planet to just give. I play them a lot on my show, and you go, it really just serves as joy. You've seen them in amusement parks, you've seen them in arenas, and they've just
exactly.
Eddie, they've just always been there for you. They're just a part of the fabric of.
And I think the thing with this is these were songs that were developmental in my upbringing. And like I said, Tom's 10 years younger, so he, the songs that spoke to him were like Wasp, Twisted Sister, 80s version of Judas Priest, so Free Will Burning.
Yeah.
So it's. It's funny, Fight, Nailed to the Gun. I had a band back in the 2000s called F5, and we did a cover of Nailed to the Gun, and I had Jimmy DeGrasso playing it. That's why I called Jimmy and said, "Hey, dude, you want to knock this out one more time with this lineup?"
And he's so good.
Oh, he's so good, and Jimmy's a total pro.
I got to see him in Rat, and it took Rat to another level. It was like. Drove the band to another level.
I saw, it's funny. I saw some clips. Jimmy and I are good friends. I mean, we message and call all the time. So I saw some video online of that. I was like, that was a good lineup.
Oh, with Carlos Cavallo. Oh my God,
super good. Yeah. So in fact, Jimmy and I we started writing. He was in Alice Cooper's band with Kerry Kelly, who now plays guitar in Night Ranger. So me and Jimmy and Kerry got together over in LA for a couple of days over the summer and did some writing, and some good stuff came out of it. So it's fun. It's fun to and it's it's like we know 2020 is this year where you can kind of cross all genre lines and collaborate and do things, and so it was it was great to do this, and I've got a couple of other collaborations that I've worked on, as well as the Megadeth record coming up. So it's again, get things parked on the runway, and then just sort of, radio the tower and let you know when you're ready to take off,
Yeah, I'm gonna. People have to hear this. I'm gonna be playing it all week, and just crossing boundaries. Kerry Kelly, I grew up with kind of in LA. We've been tight for decades, and he was as glam as it got. Like me, we were Rat Crew kids. You know what I mean? And he's so good and such a good dude. You know what I mean?
Well, Kerry, Jimmy, because he'd hit me, go, dude, we got to do something. I was like, well, Dad, I got like 5 other things on my plate right now, but of course, let's. And I had a couple of ideas on some things, and finally, I said, look, you kind of need this anchor person in the middle, and Andy Martingelli is that for the Ellefson band. He's sort of my anchor guy. I can task him with being the musical director. As me and Tom are over here whipping up crazy ideas and doing stuff, there's a sort of a logistical musical person in the middle, and that's Andy for the Ellefson band, to sort of pull the thing together, and be sort of a central headquarters of where all the files go, because a lot of this stuff these days you have to do. We're doing it on the internet, And, you know, so even with Kerry, you know, Jimmy brought up, he goes, dude, how about Kerry? I said, man, I love Kerry. Great guy. I love how he plays. He's got this real slinky, sleazy kind of sound to his guitar playing that it's very rock and roll. So it's, you know, these collaborations are fun. And Kerry's that guy, you know, he can kind of, you know, he can be Pro Tools headquarters, you know, where all the files get sent to, and the collaboration can kind of have a,
he was going Logic
center base, you know.
I remember he had Logic before anybody did here decades ago.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I still use Logic. I recorded most of the bass on this on Logic because I love, there's a warmth about Logic that it's kind of like when you record drums to analog tape, you know, there's a certain depth and fatness to it that, you know, people like. I mean, I think Pro Tools HD is pretty friggin' good right now, but I love Logic. There's a warmth to the low end that I like. Then of course it all ends up in Pro Tools by the time we mix.
Yeah.
But you know, whatever works at home. And you know, this kind of a record, I mean, like a We Are the World like this, you know, you could have never made something like this. Maybe 10 years ago you could have, but you know, more than that, people just didn't have all the recording capabilities like we do at home now.
Yeah, it's special that we do.
Yeah.
Who were you in now with this a big part of history on this record? Who were you into, and who were out of the gate your bass influences? What concerts were you going to as a kid?
Well, look, the BTO Not Fragile record, that was the first one. And the Needle Drop was Not Fragile, that had that bass opening. In fact, I got like, you know, 6 or 7 basses here. You got a bunch in the closet, another gazillion over in storage. And I mean, I was really particular on what bass to use for that, because it's a very distinctive, clean, warm sound. I tried my Steve Harris Fender with flat wounds, and there was a kind of a dead spot on the neck, as Fenders tend to have. Fenders tend to have these, and I've been recording the whole record with active basses, active electronics. So it had to, you know, there's sort of a benchmark there. So the passive thing didn't really work. And then I found that I've got this Music Man here that I never play. And I was like, you know, let me pull it out. And it was perfect. It's got that nice, the Music Man for me, because the pickup is in the back toward the bridge, is too like kind of mid-range punchy for most, certainly for anything in Megadeth, but you know, for a lot of the music I like to play, it just sits in the wrong spot. And but on that track, it worked great. Because it was tight, it was clean, there was no fret buzz.
Yeah, it is a very bright. I mean,
Yeah.
Flea obviously, you know, that was a huge part of his clarity at times. You know,
And I went over to, it's funny, I have a Spectre, a pre-Kramer Spectre NS2 that I bought out of the recycler back in '92.
Whoa!
There was the Countdown to Extinction tour. I was kind of getting this hankering for buying basses and guitars, and I'm not a collector. Like, I don't just collect guitars. If I buy a guitar, I'm going to use it. So I buy it as a practical work tool. And so I found this guy, he sold it to me. I think I paid like $1,200 or $1,300 for it. And we met over at that car wash on like Van Nuys and Ventura.
Okay, I know where you're talking about. Yeah.
It's like, where's like a safe parking place in case, you know, one of us are like a, you know, a murderer or something. Right. So where are we going to do this on? This is pre-Starbucks. Now you would just do it at Starbucks parking lot, right? So we meet there. We do the deal out of the trunk of the car, and it's funny. That turns out the guy was actually from Israel, and then a couple years later, we went to Israel on the Euthanasia tour, and he hit me up, and I was like, hey, you know, I told you I was kind of famous, like, you know, cut me a deal on the bass. You know? So, but that's great. So I have that bass, and I don't play it that much. I used it on the Megadeth Cryptic Writings record, which is one of my favorite bass sounds that I've recorded. You know, there's a lot of them, but that's one that stands out for me. But, you know, it's funny, Spectre, they got the low end and the mid-range right on that bass for hard rock and metal tones. It just sits right inside the kick drum. It's got punch. You can hear all the notes. And so I pulled that out. I used that on Eat the Rich, and had a great sound. And I'd actually been using it during the summer. I went over to LA and I cut a record with Vin Dromboski from Sponge and Mike Heller from Fear Factory and Drew Fortier from Bang Tango. We got in the room and cut a record together. Yeah, so again, fun stuff, you know. So, you know, grab a bass, drive to LA, get in a room, let's see what happens.
Oh,
so that's what my whole year has been like.
Speaking of basses, was it true that the Peace Sells riff was written on a fretless BC Rich somehow?
Yeah, I think it was because I had this fretless BC Rich, and
Do you still have it?
It was an Eagle. No, I don't. God, so many of those back in the day, they vanished. I didn't even know where they went. Like I know I had this Iron Bird from Wake Up Dead. I don't know where that went. There's just a lot of those basses that just kind of vanished over the years.
Maybe it was too powerful for the universe, that bass.
It had to vanish. Beam me up.
So that was
that was, and I forgot even how I ripped the frets out of it. I think I can't remember because I remember the frets were filled in with like wood. It was actually turned out to be a beautiful bass. It had a nice it was like natural wood, it had like a nice light stain on it. So
I know I ruined a bass as a kid trying to be Jocko because obviously he was the first, he was a rock and roll outlaw, even though if you were a bass player, though he was jazz. I heard that he just took him out with a screwdriver on that Fender, so I figured
he was our Eddie Van Halen. Eddie
right.
Eddie would chainsaw a guitar, rip something apart, put his pickups in, a surfboard wax, like anything to just, Eddie was an inventor, man. He heard something in his head and he sought out, a way to get what he heard, and Jocko was like that.
You're right. That's really guy. Yeah. Wow.
He was our Eddie Van Halen of bass, and it's funny. And I mean, I did a little bit of that. I was kind of a geek gearhead guy. I remember, I remember trying to put a Kaler whammy bridge on I had a BC Rich Eagle. I don't think it was the same. And it might have been the same one. It might have been that one, and I ripped the frets out of it and had it stained. I can't remember the Peace Sells Eagle, but I remember one night being up late at night with nothing to do. High, whatever, and taking a chisel and chiseling out the bridge. And then I finally put the bridge on. I get it on there. I screw it on. And as soon as you hit the note, as soon as you hit the wang bar, on a guitar, because the pitch is higher and the strings are thinner, it goes, doo, you get this nice dive bomb effect, right?
Right.
But on a bass, because it goes boom, as soon as you bottom it out, it just goes boom. That's all it does.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there is no dive bomb on a bass, It just goes from low to nothing. And I'm like, I stayed up all night for that.
Yeah.
And I ruined this bass. So that's why that could have been the bass that I don't know where I would have taken it. Somebody would have had to have redone it, pulled that bridge off, and then maybe fixed it up and ripped the frets out of it. Maybe that became the Peace Sells bass. I don't know.
Speaking of inventing, were you aware in Megadeth that you guys weren't pushing a sound? A lot of bands, you were inventing a genre. You were part of like writing the template. Were you aware of that at that time, that you've really written a template? That's a really large thing.
Dave is like that. I mean, Dave would, funny, he had these Bill Lawrence pickups on his BC Rich or on his Rich Bitch, and it had, the Bill Lawrence pickups have those rails on it instead of pole pieces. It has the rails, and he'd go up and he wanted to play. He was playing a lick, I think, on Skull Beneath the Skin, and he needed to get higher up past the 24 frets, which is really high. So he went up and was shredding up on the pickup, right, using the bars, the rails on the Bill Lawrence pickup, and he would do things like, I remember on it was some of the earlier stuff. I don't think it was The Conjuring, but it was something around that time that. He's up there and he's using his thumb to, get the spread, you know what I mean? To just, this wasn't far enough. It needed to go to here, and that's why when Chris Poland got in the band, he had broken this finger. I think he said he was like trying to break into a medicine cabinet or something.
Rock and roll problems.
Rock and roll, exactly. And by default, it took this finger from being straight and it sort of moved it over here.
Right.
So he actually ended up getting these extra fret or two. That's why in some of his solos that you hear, especially when he's shredding like in Devil's Island and stuff, he had this reach that was beyond what a normal guy could play. And by nature, he created this really cool sound, So, the 80s were such a developmental, not developmental, expanding generation. You know, the Charvels and Jacksons and VC Rich. You know, it wasn't enough just to have a Strat and a Les Paul anymore. Now we're going for points and wickedness and high octane pickups, and even the new Marshall JCM amps were of another level. And then these more high gain amps started to come in, and pedals. And you know, Randy Rhoads wasn't just using a Marshall; he had the Marshall plus the distortion pedal, and you know what I mean. Everything just went up.
The MXR distortion.
You know?
Yeah.
And that, so the 80s were that era, you know, and I guess probably maybe similar to what the 60s were, you know. We're taking these amplified electric instruments, and they were very unbridled, and how do we sort of harness it, and what do we do with it? And you know, and I grew up in the 70s, so obviously a lot of this stuff in this record is 70s stuff. And you know, that's when, you know, like Frampton and Joe Perry have the talk box, Pat Travers had the flanger on everything.
And when you say BTO, like I sometimes I'll emulate festivals and play, and BTO could play with Van Halen at that time. That was what was beautiful. And Foreigner could sit next to AC/DC. I love that of that time, that there was so much coexisting at that time.
Yeah, they're trying to figure the festival thing out. I mean, Bill Graham, of course, had, you know, Day on the Green, which was huge back in the day. In fact, it's funny, I'm reading Peter Frampton's memoir, Do You Feel Like I Do? And you know, great book, really great read. And you realize what he got to grow up around, you know, the early Stones and all these iconic, you know, musicians in London, and the influencers back in that day, and who were, you know, kind of making the, you know, charting the course of what the 70s would become, you know, which was his generation, and which my generation that I got to grow up on. And so you like basses, I don't have one here, but like Fender, you know, Fender guitars, like I grew up with they had the slightly bigger headstock. The Fender logo was bigger. Precision bass was written bigger. So like I own a couple of 70s P basses, because I know a lot of guys like the 60s instruments, the 60s jazz. A lot of it's because they got a skinnier fret, which helps there be less finger noise. I know a lot of the studio guys, Chuck Rainey was telling me he liked those in the studio because there was less finger noise.
Right.
Frets. But I grew up in the era of jumbo frets, the 70s, big headstock, big logo, jumbo fret. So I'm a jumbo fret guy, right? You know, so just it's interesting the year we're born, which we have no say over, but the year we're sort of popped onto the planet, you know, really is an interesting thing, because what we grow up hearing and are exposed to is really you know, it's interesting what comes out of that. You know, thrash metal, which was my generation, we're the kids that grew up with our Sabbath and Kiss metal records, but we also grew up with our punk records of the Ramones and, you know, Clash and Sex Pistols. So the angst and political and fire of punk mixed with the riffs of metal basically created thrash metal. And you know, the same could be said when you look at, you know, the early 90s Nirvana. You know, they were done with big hair and wild guitar solos. They were, and especially from Seattle, had a huge heroin problem. You know, there's a, you know, rains a lot up there. So maybe that had a lot to do with it.
I think people don't look at those factors.
There's a dark, you know, they even like, you know, again, the black metal thing that comes from up north and, you know, Scandinavia, and, you know, it's dark half the year up there, you know. That is a very different sound than Van Halen from California, which is sunshine, beach, beautiful girls.
I so agree with you. I think people overlook it. I DJ, it's my day job, and I tell people you have to play different music in the day than when you do at night. You know what I mean? There's different music, has different colors, different shapes for different times and places.
When I was growing up, you know, and it hit me at age 16. It's like Van Halen was popping big, and I never thought of California as the heavy metal capital, because to me it was always England, and that's where, you know, Ritchie Blackmore and Deep Purple and the Marshall amps, and you know, so much metal came out of the UK and certainly Europe. And Europe, you know, was exposed much more to classical music over all the centuries. You know, those composers, that's a big part of their sort of pop culture, if you will, so that inspired a lot of that metal sound. And then so, you know, but for me, I was like, Van Halen's popping, and you know, Ozzy's getting his musicians for his solo band now out of LA. So I was like, man, I got to get to LA. That's where the action's at, you know. And I get out there, and you know, it sounds like you and me kind of experienced a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah. Well, it was like landing. You know, as a band, I've been to Japan. Like you've been a zillion more places than me. But I go landing in LA in the '80s was the most foreign thing I've ever done from New Jersey. That was like the most like going to outer space for me.
Well, yeah, Jersey for you, Minnesota for me, but you're right.
So
when Megadeth Slayer, we'd always go back and we'd play Lemoore, and I remember we
played
City Gardens in Trenton. Remember that?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't old enough to go to City Gardens because I was 21 up, but Lemoore's was 18 and up, and it was like,
right.
Oh my God.
So I remember going there, and it's like, this is a way different. The girls were tougher.
Yeah, you know, it was a different thing.
The dudes were a little fucking more impact, you know, and it's I know it really was. It was a cool experience to get to. And you're right, in LA was just a whole different thing. You know, Dave said when we started Megadeth, he goes, we're going to debut the band up in San Francisco, not LA, and we did. And you know, San Fran was a whole different vibe than LA. Yeah. I mean, completely different. So
the stone, everything. Yeah. It's funny that you say that. Before we get back to Lemoore's, when we were talking about the Spectre basses as a kid, a lot of guys at Lemoore's could really play a lot of the, you know, openers. And there's a lot of Spectre basses. And like you say, it probably had to do with the area because Kramer was in Neptune, New Jersey. You know what I mean? Maybe that, and which
it had a big part. I mean, look, Jackson, you know, Grover Jackson and Wayne Charvel. I mean, I remember reading Eddie Van Halen was talking about getting these Charvel necks and things in Guitar Player magazine interviews when I was, you know, a teenager. And then, you know, I get to LA and BC Rich. I owned a BC Rich. I bought it, you know, when I lived in Minnesota. I get to LA. Dave's got a BC Rich. I got a BC Rich. When Kerry King joined our band to play for some shows with us, he had BC Rich. So kind of, you know, it's like your heart center, right? If you're into like wicked shredding, ripping metal, you know, that you had to have pointy BC Riches, you know, if, you know, Rat and a lot of these guys, you know, the you know, sort of, you know, smoother legato guitar players, they were doing the Jackson Charvel thing. Yeah. So it sort of, you know, these guitars, but that was very much a West Coast. BC Rich and Charvel and Jackson was all very much West Coast stuff. So,
first of all, I want to thank Ivan, my boyhood friend, for hooking us up. The last one I wanted to ask you, I went to see Megadeth years ago. I've done obviously thousands of concerts I've seen at the Palladium in Hollywood, and I was on the upper balcony, and I've never seen, not at Metallica, and it looked like weather systems on the floor, the magnet, like, but no, is it ever scary? Is that ever, I mean, like, I don't get scared, but it was pretty scary. It was like, it looked like nothing I'd ever seen. Is that ever fearful? I mean,
well, let's just say we've played to a lot of pits. I wouldn't want to be in them.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
You know, and it is, you know, it's funny. The only time I was ever in any kind of what I would ever consider a pit, and there's twice, I guess, you know, as AC/DC came to town. Sioux Falls, South Dakota, when I was growing up, and they actually were supporting Cheap Trick, which, and it's funny, both of them were supporting a live album. Cheap Trick was coming off of Budokan, and I think they actually played Dream Police. They were just about ready to drop the Dream Police record. And AC/DC, I think it was their debut into America.
See Bon Scott?
Yeah, Bon Scott. Yes, it was Power Age, but they were also supporting on Power Age. They did the live album "If You Want Blood, You Got It," which is the album that got me into them. Which is why we cut Riff Raff on this record, because that was my introduction to AC/DC was from that live album. Riff Raff is the opening track. So I was front row and just was such a fan. You know, that was my one fanboy concert that I went to. And then I don't know, I guess 1980. So it would have been right around the same time Van Halen came through on Women and Children First. It was the 1980 Invasion. And I remember being in, you know, and it was a general admission, this particular arena in Sioux Falls. And I remember, you know, getting sort of caught in that swell, you know, and you're just sort of getting moved around by the crowd and my feet aren't touching the ground. And it was frightening. You know what I mean?
So glad you know what it's about. That's good.
And of course, that was very mellow. That was 1980, and that wasn't thrash metal.
Yeah,
that was obviously a very excited crowd. And you know, when you go to a Van Halen show, you're probably high. Drinking. You know, so you're just kind of stuck there. You know, but yeah, I mean, some of these. yeah, it's frightening. And weather systems, that's a good way to.
It looked like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dave, so much for your time. I'm going to put the links to the new album. It's amazing. And thank you for all the music you've given us and being such a great dude.
You are welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you.